Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Kim Minch, and she is going to talk to us about turning your relationship with your teen around. I hear stories all the time of um, really just a disconnect between teens and their parents, and kids have had such a hard time through the pandemic, and it's just harder to be a teenager than it used to be. We didn't grow up dealing with social media issues or thinking there may be something on the internet that follows us forever. And these teens are having a different experience, and they need their parents more than ever. How are you, Kim?
I am great, Sarah, and so happy to be talking with you today.
Well, I am happy to be talking to you. And we already recognized she's in one of my absolute favorite cities that I used to, before the pandemic, we could have done this live, but now we're graciously meeting through the internet. So, Kim, let's talk about how to turn things around for your teen. Or maybe let's start with what does that disconnect look like? If you feel like things aren't going well with your teen, which sign should you watch out for that relationship is severed?
Well, Sarah, I think one of the greatest challenges that I see in the work that I do, and as being a mom of five, is that we have parents that are trying to parent the way they were raised. And that is not working. It's not working because, as you mentioned, we have a lot more information coming at us. We have screen time. We have things, our kids are encountering things that we didn't even have any idea were possible in daily, use in terms of media coming in, the influence that has on the way kids feel about themselves and their relationships and everything else. So I think the biggest problem that I see, especially during the teen years, is that we are trying to parent the way we were raised, because that's, first of all, a lot of us, that's all we know. And second, it's because we think now we're in the parent seat and our kids need to be respecting us and doing all the things that we once did. And with all of this additional information coming in for our kids, they have so much influence that isn't us as parents, especially as they head through their teen years, right? So what's important for parents to be doing is shifting from a place of wanting to power over or control, or coming from a place of fear, which is all understandable, because all of us as parents are wondering, what are our kids seeing and how is this influencing them? And they're spending so many hours in front of a screen, and they're not going outside and all the things that are related to the pandemic. There's just so much, right? But what I'm seeing and what I'm saying and what I've invested in my own relationships with my kids that are 16 to 34 at this point, is we've got to create a relationship with our kids that doesn't look like a friendship, but doesn't look like we're also trying to control them. It has to, there's a tightrope walk that we have to take during adolescence that goes from wanting to teach our kids, knowing the answers, or not being open to their thoughts and feelings, to one of coming alongside of them and guiding them. I'm not talking about a friendship. Our kids have friends. They don't need us to be their friend. They need us to be the structure and the scaffolding as they change and grow into adulthood. They need us to be the safe place to fall when they've made a mistake or an unhealthy choice. They don't need us to, on top of whatever natural consequences come from the decisions or the choices they've made, to shame them on top of it with consequences and punishments. They don't need that.
So really moving away from I'm the parent, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you may gain with certain kids, you may gain some compliance for now, but you have to look at this parenting role as a lifelong journey and ask yourself what you want, what kind of relationship you want to have when your child becomes an adult. Because the reality is, if you white knuckle it all the way through their adolescence, and maybe you get them to college or they move out of the house or whatever, how much are they going to want to come home? And how much influence and relationship do you think you will have with your future grandchildren? We, parents, are the manual on which our grandchildren will be raised. And that is something really to think about, right? I mean, it really is. It's if we have so much influence on the future, parents do. And I don't think they understand that. They come from a place of, again, wanting to control or coming from a place of fear, when what our kids need during these teen years is a place for them to come and be able to talk openly about what they are learning, about the experiences they are having. I mean, our kids are just coming into situations that we never entertained as teenagers, with their kids and their relationships, their friends. So it's really important for us to get past the fear and anxiety. And that's what I do work with parents on when I'm coaching them, because a lot of it is just they're anxious, they're fearful of the future. And let's just stay here and build a close connection with the kids now so that they will listen to our wisdom. Because when we're just lecturing at them, they're not listening, they're going to shut down, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important piece to mention, because it's it's more fun to think, hey, my teen's having problems and look how great I am. Or my kids are having problems, but look how great I'm doing, versus, hey, maybe there's some control issues. And I see this a lot, in my work. A lot of my women are divorced, right? And so there's something just terrifying about the lack of control of that. It's like there's a whole piece of my kid's life that I can't monitor, what movies they watch, who's at their house, whether or not they're spending the night with someone I'm not comfortable with. Like, it is a huge loss of control. I also think that's been one of the greatest gifts of my own parenting, right? Because when I see some of my friends who kind of have this illusion that they still can control their kids, and I lost that illusion drastically early in my kid's life. And, it's both a gift and a curse.
Right. Well, and I will say this, the other thing that I see is parents are willing to invest in their kids' success in terms of whether that's academics or sports or music classes or whatever it is. But they don't, when it comes to investing in the relationships with their kids, that's not something that's on their radar. And parents, as much as I've just said, we need to ease back on the control, parents do have more control than they think to influence the kind of relationship they're having with their teenager. But that comes from working on themselves, not from, oh, my teen has the problem, let's get him or her into counseling. The child may very well need counseling, but whatever problem that child is having, it's part of the family system. And so when parents are working on themselves in tandem with this child getting counseling if they need it, that is the true, that is the real opportunity for transformation of a family. If you just send a child to counseling because they're having a problem and you're not looking at what part you might play in it, I know this, and I speak from experience with having a child that went through addiction. I mean, I didn't sit in it and wallow in it, but I had to acknowledge where my parenting contributed to the situation that he was in. So being accountable, if we want our kids to be accountable, we also need to be accountable to the relationship that we're having with them. And like I said, we really do have more control than we think. We just have to shift the way we're building this relationship, because what we experienced as kids doesn't work in this generation.
So what are some ways that parents have control, that they have more control than they realize?
Well, I think
that we might miss.
When we provide an environment at home where we're willing to listen to who our kids are and not who we want or need them to be, that signals that they are in a safe place, that they are in a place where they can really be themselves. When they feel that, they are more open to listening to what we have to say.
I want to stop you there for something for our listeners. So a lot of my audience have had experiences with they usually find me because there's some conversation about narcissism or something like that. And then they come to me, and I don't obsess over that piece of the work because there's plenty of people obsessing over narcissists, and I'm really building that life after. But in that life after, empathy and accepting your child for who they are rather than who you want them to be is the absolute golden ticket to avoiding parental alienation, avoiding, all these problems, because that is, if you were with someone who is unempathetic and is a narcissist and needs a child as an extension of themselves, that is the one piece of the battle. I hate to call it that way, but that's the one token that you can do that your ex cannot in having that solid relationship with a kid. Because I have a lot of people and they're afraid of losing their child. And I'm like, it's not counter parenting. It's just good parenting. Who is your child? Learn who they are, help support who they are. It has nothing to do with the ex. Like, it has nothing to even do with that. It's just trying to be a good parent to the child that is in your home, not the child that you consider as an extension of yourself. Right.
Or you envisioned this child would be, or I think that's one of I have, like I mentioned, I have 5 kids and they're all incredibly different human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And to learn as a parent how to detach from your child's outcomes because they're not a reflection of who you are is one of the greatest things that, and that's not something that we can, break down in 2 minutes, but it is one of the things that in, 3 decades of parenting, I have really valued and learned is to appreciate my kids and to understand we don't know why they've come into the world and what they're meant to experience. That doesn't mean we just don't have any rules and hey, let them do what they want. It's not that. It's just to understand as a parent, we can't always protect what our kids may have to go through and encounter in their lifetimes and what they're going to grow through. Because if you look at your own teen years, if you look at, I know I actually became a mother at the age of 18, and some of the turmoil and some of the challenges I went through with my parents also contributed to my ability to be resilient and my ability to, when I make choices, to live out those consequences of whatever the choices are. And I think really that we don't concentrate on that as much, from a parent perspective. We can really want to protect our kids when sometimes the most important thing for them to do is to go through something that we wish they would never have to go through.
And that's also a really important piece for my audience, because usually there's a lot of guilt from like, you've already been through this because of my marriage or this type of thing. So now my job is to protect you from every other single possibly thing that could ever happen. And you're a teenager and I'm going to be really, really in your business and really make sure. And you see this, like, for those listening on the podcast, you can't see my lean in energy. Kim's like, that's the dynamic I see. And I see it going very poorly.
Yeah. And it's understandable. I was in my eldest son that I had as a teenager. That was an abusive, narcissistic relationship that I was in. I've since married and have been married for many years. But in terms of, and actually going back to what you said about appreciating our kids for who they are, there was a time at which maybe some of your listeners will identify with this. When my son was about 13, 14 years old, he started to show some mannerisms and some attitudes that his dad had. And I think I remember, and I started down this path of like really getting irritated and triggered very much by it and really worried about that he was going to turn into his father kind of thing. And I really had to, I remember exactly where I was in my house that said, this child is not his father. Do not put him in this same situation. Again, I think that's where maybe I started the whole appreciate your child for who he is and not who you want or need him to be. And don't start freaking out because you've heard him say this and that kind of reminds you of his dad. And that, it's not easy, but it is an everyday practice. So I would say if a parent has gone down a path of like, making this comparison and really, it's never too late. Today's a new day, and it's a practice every single day. But your child is not their parent.
Well, in a way that I talk to women about that is if you have a narcissist or someone who has narcissistic tendencies, they act like the worst version of teenager that exists or the worst stage of teen, and the problem is that they are 30, 40, 50 acting like that, not that the 13 and 14-year-old has some off days, right?
Yes, yes.
The problem is that it expanded.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes. So yeah, so working on not being triggered, getting down this future tripping rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, I'm seeing this and this is going to happen and whatever. Teenagers are fairly, can be fairly self-centered stage of development. And so keeping that in mind, I think also, again, I love working with parents who have a lot of anxiety and helping them to understand what's okay and what might be a red flag, things, and helping be the container of that fear and anxiety, so it isn't inadvertently projected onto their kids. Because kids are going through enough, right?
You talked about some ways in your own life that you kind of wish you had, I don't want to say prevent addiction, but you kind of said when you were going through a childhood addiction that there were certain characteristics you looked at. And I'm guessing those are connected to some of those red flags that you just mentioned, and the things parents really should be worried about.
Yeah, the situation that I was in was, I extricated myself from my son's father. I got out of the relationship, but of course we had to co-parent. And because my son was going between two very different homes, and because honestly, I had such a difficult time dealing with his dad. Like I always felt that I was coming from a place of really just wanting to do the best for our son. And I did think it was important for him to have a relationship with his son. So I never tried to withhold that, but we didn't always see things eye to eye. And quite frankly, he was very unhappy that I left the situation. And what I didn't realize was for many years, he took that out on my son. And my son was very loyal to his father. And there was emotional and physical abuse that I had no idea was taking place. And as a preteen, my son we did get him into counseling, right? We got him into counseling because we could see he was anxious. He was showing signs of depression, not being able to get up in the morning. But what I understood when it finally came to light at 20 that he was addicted to alcohol, which he started drinking at 15 after we'd go to bed at night because he couldn't sleep, was that he was enduring, a lot of abuse. And so I can sit in the fact that as difficult as his dad was for me to deal with, there came a point during my son's teen years that I was pretty much hands off with his dad and just, I communicated with my son and I didn't really know what was going on in the other situation. We had rules at our house that I knew his dad didn't also keep in place, but there was nothing that I was going to be able to do about that. My son at 16, he gave him a car. So we no longer even had to pass the child back and forth, to see each other for those few minutes. And the only time I ever really saw him was at school conferences. And quite frankly, I'm glossing over a lot of the story, but he was an alcoholic. He ended up dying at the age of 42. But the only time I saw his dad was at school conferences. And I would stand away from him because I didn't want other parents to know or think that we were together because he reeked of alcohol. And it just wasn't, I just didn't want to be associated with him. And so I'm sure, and my son was there at those times. And so I'm sure that my lack of ability to converse or to work with his dad at times contributed to maybe feeling isolated, my son feeling isolated and that kind of thing. However, I will say, I felt like my son and I had a great relationship during his teen years. We talked about a lot of things. It was just, your kids will only tell you what they can tell you, like we had good rapport. He would talk to me about girlfriends and stuff like that. But he wouldn't share what was going on, in the other situation. So yes, being accountable for, and my son and I have talked this through, right? He's an adult, and we've talked about this, and I'm blessed to say that not only is he 11 years sober, but he's told me a number of times that he wouldn't change a thing about what's happened in his life, because it's made him who he is, and he loves who he is. So that's how, I mean, it's helpful to know that, right? And I know how easy it is as a parent to look at the negatives or the things that you may be contributed to, or how you got yourself into this relationship. None of that serves you, nor does it serve the relationship with your child. It is never too late. It is never too late to acknowledge, but also to move forward and to build from whatever situation you're in at the moment.
So what is your favorite tip for moving forward and building into that next phase?
Okay, here's what I've come to believe. This is a quote that came to me a couple years ago, and I truly believe that if a parent will think about this, they can move forward. And that is this: our children come through us, not for us, except for the lessons they reflect to us during their journey, in an effort to grow us up along the way. So our children are our greatest teachers. And we can use motherhood and or fatherhood as a way to reparent and grow ourselves up. And again, I will say that, we are the manual in which the future generations will be parented. So what could be a more important thing to assess and to work on every day than this role that you have as, a leader in your home?
I love it. And I am often talking about leading by examples. I love the being a leader in your home, and being a leader in emotional health, a leader in mental health, a leader in stability, right? So that we're not, oh, we got my cord up and down all the time, because if you're up and down all the time, you're going to get a mess.
Yes.
A good illustration.
Yeah.
Kim, tell people where they can find more out about you.
You can find out about me on my website, which is reallifeparentguide.com. And also I have a book out called Becoming Me While Raising You. You can find that on Amazon.
I love it. Kim, thank you for helping us today on our journey to raising teens and becoming toxic person proof.
Thanks, Sarah.